So Pitt's 1-0. Panthers beat Duquesne on Saturday, 61-9. Certainly unique score. A score I've never seen in a football game. I'm guessing you've never seen that score in a football game either. But aside from the uniqueness of the score, what stood out in that win? I think we talked about it a lot on Saturday in the postgame show. We talked a lot about over the weekend. Talked about it a lot over the weekend on the message boards. And I imagine we'll keep talking about it a lot this week, trying to take as much as we can out of a win over an FCS opponent, an overmatched FCS opponent. The good, the bad, the ugly-ish. I don't know if there was a ton of ugly, but there was certainly a lot to talk about. And while we'll try not to draw too many conclusions from Pitt's win over Duquesne on Saturday, I think there's some key things to highlight. So we got our Monday thoughts. We do this, I think we did this throughout last year. I think every Monday edition of the Morning Pitt, I would just call the Monday thoughts on Saturday's game. So here we are, Monday thoughts on Saturday's win over Duquesne to get your week started here on the Morning Pitt, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Yeah, it's Monday after a game. It's officially week 2 of the college football season. Pitt getting ready to face Central Michigan on Saturday at Acrisure Stadium for a noon kickoff, second game of the season. Certainly going to tell us a lot more than the first game, and I think we're all coming out of the first game with plenty of questions that can and maybe will, hopefully will, be answered at least to a greater extent against Central Michigan than they were against Duquesne. But we'll get into the questions later in the week. For now, it's just about observations from Saturday's game against Duquesne. As you can see up there, we got lots of content on Panther-Lair.com if you want to get caught up on everything that happened in the game. We had key stats. We had all the newcomers who played, all the true freshmen and transfers got on the field and what they did. Also kind of a personnel rundown. How did they rotate? Who started? What was the depth? When did the depth, when did they go into the bench? And how do they rotate players at different positions where they typically rotate? I think we learned a few things in that regard. We learned Kendall Stanley's the first tackle off the bench because when Ryan Baer came out of the game, Stanley came in at right tackle, even though he's officially the listed backup at left tackle. And when they went to the second team offensive line, Kendall Stanley was lining up at left tackle. We learned that. We learned that, well, the coaches didn't really have any interest in exploring the depth at safety since Cruz Brookins and Javon McIntyre played virtually the entire, the whole first half and I think a decent portion of the third quarter before Josh Guerrier finally came in. Nobody else played in the base defense, and really the only safety substitution was Kavir Baines-Marquez coming in the Delta defensive sub package, so we saw no rotation there. We did see that Sean Lee Jr., the true freshman cornerback from Harrisburg, was the fourth corner. We knew Tamon Lynham and Rashad Battle and Shadarian Harrison were the top 3 guys, but we learned that Sean Lee Jr. was the fourth corner who came in ahead of Rashawn Murray, the transfer from Cal PA. We'll see if that holds up. We learned that the coaches didn't have a lot of interest in exploring their depth at linebacker. The losses of Jeremiah Marcelin and Jaden Bonsu were notable, of course, and we knew that was going to test the depth, but they really didn't go into the depth all that much. I think Nick Lappy played about 16 snaps. Cam Lindsey played about a dozen. Lappy played some in the middle and some at outside linebacker. Lindsey played in place of Kyle Lewis, and I think looked good. The reality is you're going to need those guys to play a lot more. I mean, you're going to need Nick Lappy and Cam Lindsey on the field throughout this season. I think Lindsey in particular is going to be an important player, and I think he looks like he can be pretty good. He had a sack where he just looked like he was shot out of a cannon and chased the quarterback down. It was pretty impressive to see. You're going to need those guys, so I was a little surprised at their lack of usage. I was a little surprised that the coaches stuck with those top 3 linebackers, Kyle Lewis, Rasheem Biles, Braylon Lovelace, as long as they did without any substitutions. That was little surprising to me, and maybe that might have been the most surprising substitution decision or rotational decision that we saw in that game on Saturday, given that you can't just play those 3 guys all season long. You're going to have situations where they get hurt. We saw Braylon Lovelace had to come off for a little bit there. You're going to have that, and you're going to have to rest those guys. You're going to need Nick Lappy and Cam Lindsey to be ready. And that was the game to get them ready, to get them 30 snaps or 25 snaps or something like that. And instead they end up with, according to Pro Football Focus, 16 snaps for Lappy and 12 for Lindsey on defense. Those guys, I think, probably played a little bit more on special teams. But we're talking about defensive snaps here. We're talking about getting on the field, playing in the defense, and being ready to step in for Lewis, Lovelace, and or Biles when the time comes. And I'm not sure that game against Duquesne provided Nick Lappy or Cam Lindsey any real opportunity to get more comfortable. I mean, they played, like I say, Lindsey played 12 snaps. Like, I think you needed more than that. We'll see what they get against Central Michigan. But that was probably the biggest rotational note that stood out. It was interesting to see Zach Crothers get some time as the, I guess as the third defensive end, really. You had Jimmy Scott and Blaine Spires start, and Crothers was the first end off the bench on Duquesne's third offensive series. So that was kind of interesting to see him playing ahead of Joey Zielinski, the transfer from Eastern Michigan. I think they'll probably end up with a near even split of reps as the season goes on. And Zielinski, I thought, looked quick. He looked fast, getting off the ball and running into the backfield. I think Crothers looks solid as well. Jaden Moore is probably the guy we were most excited about in the offseason. Not only did he not dress for that game on Saturday, but he wasn't even on the sideline. And when the guys are up in the, they say up in the press box, but they're not sitting there next to me and Jim taking notes on the game. They're in the coach's box or something like that. But when guys are not on the sideline, that's usually not a very good sign for them returning to the field and playing anytime soon. So it could be a while till we see Jaden Moore out there. But in terms of rotational stuff and personnel stuff, those were probably some of the most interesting notes. No surprise on the starting wide receivers. We see them right there. Kenny Johnson, Raphael Williams, Blue Hicks, one of the top players in the game. I think Johnson and Hicks were both really impressive. And even Williams had a 45-yard catch. There's you see the photo of Blue Hicks making that incredible one-handed grab in the end zone. Those guys were the top three receivers. I think we expected that. Duquesne and Zion Fowler-El being the next two guys in, with Sincere Lee kind of still limited, still working up to it, I guess. I think he was dressed, but he's still kind of coming back from that injury he suffered, I believe, in the Clemson game last year. It was a pretty serious injury. Held him out all of spring, limited what he could do in training camp, and I think they're still working him back in. But more or less the rotation you expected. Ditto at running back, where it was Desmond Reed and Joels Goff with Jalen Williams behind them. Ja'Karian Turner didn't play. I think he was in uniform, the true freshman running back who's going to, I think, play a big part this season. He was banged up during camp. I think they're trying to be smart with him and be safe. But, not too many surprises otherwise. Probably the one other thing, I keep saying not too many surprises. That's about it. And then I add one more thing. The one other thing I would say is that Eli Holstein and Desmond Reed played more than like one drive of the second half. After Desmond Reed's 53-yard touchdown run in the second half, on the first drive, the second play, basically, of the third quarter, I was like, that's it. We don't need to see Reed or Holstein again, but those guys stayed in, played a little bit longer. I probably would have pulled them because there's nothing to really be gained from having them on the field at that point in a blowout game like that. But that's the personnel stuff. That's the numbers stuff, the sort of data, things to kind of file away and keep in mind and watch for this Saturday when they play Central Michigan, of how they rotate and what kind of personnel they use. I think probably the biggest thing most people came away from that game thinking was, should you be concerned about Pitt's offense? And that was probably the biggest question. And they scored 61 points. I mean, take away, one touchdown. They didn't score, how many touchdowns would that be? 8 touchdowns. They scored 7 offensive touchdowns, right? One was Desmond Reed's punt return touchdown to, first score of the game. They score 7 offensive touchdowns. And you say, okay, that's pretty good. They have all these big plays. Bryce Yates gets a 60-yard touchdown run. Desmond Reed runs for a touchdown catch. Desmond Reed has a 53-yard touchdown run. Eli Holstein throws 4 touchdowns. Blue Hicks catches 2. Kenny Johnson had a nice touchdown. Like, wow, their offense must have been humming. 460 yards, 4 touchdown passes. They average 7-8 yards per play. Okay. All those numbers sound impressive. And I think this is a game where, if you just sit back and you get out this box score here with the stat sheet and everything like this in it, and you're like, wow, 61 points, 7 touchdowns, 4 passing touchdowns, 460 yards, 158 rushing, all this stuff. You say, okay, that's dominant. They played a great game. They played a dominant game. But then when you watch the game, and if you watched the game, if you were at the game, you might not have felt like it was quite as impressive as the numbers indicated. You might have watched the game and Pitt's first offensive play was a handoff to Desmond Reed that gained 1 yard. Pitt's second offensive play was a pass from Eli Holstein to Raphael Williams on something, one of those kind of out patterns that ended up either turning into pick sixes or nearly turning into pick sixes seemingly 100 times last year. And that's an exaggeration, but it was almost picked off. You might have seen, that the third down play on the first drive, a 3rd and 9, they threw a little swing pass to Desmond Reed for 2 yards. Incidentally, that was the only time he was targeted on a pass in the game, which, if we're going to play the back and forth of, well, they didn't have their whole offense available, or they didn't do this, or they held back, or they ran a vanilla offense. The one biggest thing that was missing from the offense yesterday in terms of plays that I think we'll see a lot of this year was passes to Desmond Reed. They only threw to him once, and I don't think Duquesne was necessarily taking that away. I think Pitt was strategically not throwing to Desmond Reed. He's going to be a big part of the game plan. He finished with 147, I think, all-purpose yards yesterday, and that's with only 2 receiving yards. Very easily, probably could have gone over 200 all-purpose yards just by adding another. I think he very easily, if they had targeted him in the passing game, he could have gotten 50 to 60 receiving yards to go along with his, obviously, big punt return touchdown and big rushing touchdown. I think he easily could have gotten a lot more yards if they had thrown to them, but they didn't. Maybe they're trying to hold some things back there. But I think when you look at Pitt's offense, like I say, when you set the numbers aside and you watched them in the game on Saturday, or you rewatch it and you look at it and you say, boy, it just doesn't feel like the kind of dominance that you would expect to see playing against an overmatched FCS opponent. And I think that's fair. I think that's a fair criticism, particularly when it comes to the run. I think Duquesne was loading up to try and stop the run. I think they were selling out to try and stop the run, and that was part of it. I don't think there was a huge commitment to the run from Pitt's play calling. Desmond Reed had 8 carries, Juelz Goff had 7, Jalen Williams had 2, and Caleb Williams had 1. So what's the math on that? 18 rushing attempts for Pitt's running backs? And Desmond Reed averaged 8 yards per carry on his 8 attempts, but 53 of his 66 yards came on 1 run. So he had 1 run for 53 yards, 7 runs for 13 yards. So less than 2 on that on the rest of his rushes, other than that 1 long one. But maybe that's just what the running game is with Desmond Reed and with Pitt's run blocking, is that it's 1 yard, 1 yard, 2 yard, -1, -2, 1, 2, 67. Like it just, and in the end, it ends up with an average where, like I say, Desmond Reed averaged 8.3 yards per carry. Wow, that's impressive. That's exciting, but it wasn't exactly a consistent, performance of moving the line of scrimmage and picking up 4 or 5 yards in chunks before you break off that big run. And I think, you're going to have games like that. You're going to have games where you're not able to push the other team around, where you're not able to establish the run in that kind of consistent fashion. You're going to have games like that all season. But you'd like to think that Duquesne, no disrespect to the Dukes, you'd like to think that Duquesne is a game where you can do that. You'd like to think that Duquesne is a game where you can establish the line of scrimmage, where you can control the line of scrimmage, push the other team's defense around, and sort of run the ball at will, which they were very much not able to do on Saturday. Final stats notwithstanding, they didn't run the ball at will. I think if we went down carry by carry, there were a lot more 1s and 2s than there were 8s and 9s. And I think you'd like to assume that against Duquesne, you're going to be able to get more of those 8s and 9s than the 1s and 2s. So that's concerning. And like we can hand wave a lot of stuff and chalk it up to vanilla offense, holding things back, not having the full playbook available to you. But like, run blocking's run blocking. You either move the guy in front of you or you don't. And if you do move the guy in front of you, you're going to get good gains. And if you don't move the guy in front of you, then you're going to get stopped for a lot of short gains or, lost yardage. And I would say Pitt on Saturday got stopped for a lot more short gains and lost yardage, which makes me think their offensive line wasn't able to control the line of scrimmage. Now, I think they did a decent job pass protecting. I want to say, I had the stats pulled up, but I want to say, according to Pro Football Focus, at least, Pitt gave up maybe about 7 pressures. Eli Holstein, on his 26 dropbacks, was pressured 7 times. So less than 30% of the time. I mean, any pressure is too many, one pressure is too many pressures, but like, not bad, like decent decent protection. I thought they did a good job. They're really, he obviously had a big sack when Kendall Stanley came in place of Ryan Baer, pretty much the first play when Stanley came in at right tackle, gave up a big sack off the right side, but that was the only pressure that Stanley allowed. So I thought Pitt's offensive line did okay in the pass protection, but you'd like to see them establish the run a little bit better. And I think that's important for this offense to be able to do so. And so that's one of the biggest questions going into next week. And like I say, we'll talk about big questions throughout the week. The other one is Eli Holstein himself. Not great to start the game. By his own admission, there was some rust. By his own admission, he didn't have a great start to the game. Now, I think he got going and played better. In the second and third quarter, his numbers were much better than they were in the first quarter. I had it all written down. Let's see if I can find that note of first quarter, second quarter, third quarter splits. First quarter, he was 5 of 8 for 34 yards. Second and third combined, he was 10 of 15 for 181, 3 touchdowns and a pick. The pick was bad. By his own admission, it was bad. But, the touchdown pass to Blue Hicks was a beauty. I mean, that was perfectly placed. Only Blue Hicks could get to it. He was the only one who could make a play on the ball. It was never going to be touched by the defender. And Blue Hicks, he gave his playmaker, he gave his receiver a chance to go make plays, and the receiver responded by making a play. I thought the touchdown pass to Kenny Johnson was vintage Eli Holstein. He didn't really scramble. He moved around a little bit, but he mostly moved around just in the pocket and then stepped up and found Kenny Johnson. Kenny Johnson got open. Actually, there's a picture of the play right there. Look at that for serendipity or whatever you want to call it. That was perfect timing. But I mean that's an Eli Holstein play. Keep it alive. Allow your receivers to get open. Hopefully they can run the scramble drill and then hit those guys. And make the plays, and that's, or give those guys a chance to make the plays, and that's exactly what happened on that Kenny Johnson touchdown. And so I think he got better as the game went on Saturday. But when you go into this weekend's game against Central Michigan, and this is probably the biggest question of the game, the number one thing that we're going to be watching is, can he pick up where he left off? Okay, you're all right. You had rust because you haven't really played in a game since the Louisville game. And even then you only played like 2 series, and before that you missed the game. Okay, you might have been a bit rusty. I'm willing to allow that. I'm willing to concede it. But now the rust should be off. You should have shaken or shook the rust off in that first quarter, second quarter against Duquesne. And now you should be a little bit more comfortable and a little bit more whatever the opposite of rusty is. Well-oiled? I'm not sure. You should be ready to go. And you should come out playing well. No slow starts against Central Michigan. You should come out feeling comfortable. If more of the playbook needs to be available, then it should be. And you should be able to throw better, pass better, play better than you did against Duquesne. And like I said, I think Holstein finished the game well. I'll say, as we see a picture of him running right there, I thought he did well with the scrambles. He made good decisions on when to run, when to take off, when to slide, and made good plays in that regard. And those are important parts of his game as well. But he needs to come out a lot sharper than he did against Duquesne. Otherwise, like I say, I think Blue Hicks and Kenny Johnson played well. Defensively, I think the back 7 more or less lived up to expectations. I thought the linebackers were really good. I thought Cruz Brookins was really good. I thought the corners were fine. The defensive line, I think, showed some promise. It only got 1 sack out of those guys. You'd like to see a little bit more production, but I thought they were getting into the backfield, putting some pressure on Duquesne's quarterback. They obviously did well against the run and kind of shut that down. And that's going to be key all season long. I think Central Michigan's probably going to try and run, so this might play into Pitt's hands, but it'll be an opportunity for that defensive line to keep growing and evolving and taking steps forward. If the D-line can get it together and the linebackers can stay healthy, this defense can be really, really good. Those are 2 big ifs, and maybe a lot to ask over the course of a 13-game season, but the defense can be really good, I think. I think they've got the talent, and you saw some flashes of it on Saturday. Biggest question on the defensive side this week is, can the defensive line do even more to control the line of scrimmage, more than they did on Saturday against Duquesne, where they did a decent job, but maybe could have been a little bit more impactful, made more plays behind the line of scrimmage, getting after the quarterback, and the running backs as well. So overall, it's a 52-point win. You gained 500 yards. You gave up just a little more than 200. Your true freshman kicker made 2 field goals and 7 extra points. He had 1 blocked. On the whole, I mean, it's far. There are the list of worse outcomes that could have resulted from that game. It's a long list. There are a lot of ways that could have gone worse, but it didn't. Pitt won. They won comfortably. They added on a few scores against Duquesne's like 3rd and 4th team guys late in the game, which should be taken into consideration. But even though it was 14-6, 5 minutes into the second quarter, it was never really in question. I think once Pitt got the next touchdown, the Juelz Goff run, sort of capitalizing on good field position, 18 yards from the goal line. Juelz Goff cashed it in for the touchdown, and it was off to the races at that point. I mean, it was a comfortable win, obviously. You win by 52 points, it was comfortable. Just would have liked to have seen some elements of the team a little bit more dominant. Would have liked to have seen the quarterback play a little bit better start to finish. But at least he finished well, finished strong, and now he needs to pick up from there against Central Michigan. All right, we'll have a great week of Pitt content for you and coverage. Pat Narduzzi press conference today. We'll have interviews and articles throughout the week. Plenty more breakdowns of the Pitt Duquesne game and everything to get you ready for Pitt Central Michigan on Saturday. So make sure you like this video and subscribe to youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Hope you had a great weekend. Enjoy your Labor Day today, and we will catch up with you tomorrow for the Morning Pitt right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.